What's up, homies? Good morning. Just want to say that I love y'all dearly, and I really miss y'all, miss being with y'all. And as funny as it sounds, I miss setting up chairs with y'all, like the things that you wouldn't even think about. But I have chapter 8. It's called Teaching into an Encounter. And reading this, I had to read it a few times because I didn't really know where I wanted to take this chapter. Um, but I found 5 things that I really think Bill was highlighting and that I really want to focus on. Um, and I think this entire chapter focuses on. Sorry, the clock's going off for some reason, but Bill really focuses on being a leader of power and action instead of just a speaker with good words. So if you're taking notes, I'm titling this Stop Talking and Start Doing. Um, but number one on the list, as leaders, we have to hold ourselves to a higher standard. Um, and we know this just from internship, like coming in, we're leading the church, we're leading kids, we're leading people. Everyone's looking at us. It's like all eyes on us. If y'all know that song, I don't know about that, but but as Christians, we're held to a higher standard, and it's up for us to decide to hold ourselves to that higher standard, um, because we we as leaders can't typically do the same things that regular people coming into the church can, um, for the sole purpose that we're being watched. And that's not to say that we're changing who we are because we're being watched. That's to say that because we are leaders, we set the expectation of what being a Christian is supposed to be. And on page 88, Bill says, we must require from ourselves doing with power. And so that high standard, I think it's really funny because the word require means in need for our particular purpose. And when he says with power, he's saying we're required to do things with power for a purpose, right? And I believe he's saying as leaders, we can't slack. We can't do the things that everyone else is doing. We can't resort to the same feelings, the same actions that everyone else is taking. We have to hold ourselves to a higher standard, to do what God wants us to do in his power and not in our strength. So number one, rise to a higher standard. And number two, we have to rely on God. This is a concept that I think most of us have been taught from birth. And if you grew up in Sunday school, you're taught constantly that you have to rely on God's strength and not your strength. And that's so true. It's something I've really been learning this year, because I really like to rely on myself. I like to feel like I'm in control and that I have it all figured out. But in reality, I know nothing compared to God. But relying on someone or something is putting 100% of your trust and confidence in them. It's saying, okay, I can't do it, so I need you to do it, right? So when you're putting everything in God, it's not 50 or 60%, it's 100%. It's giving it all and going all in. And I think, kind of like I was saying, this has personally been a struggle for me because even though I'm a very all-in person, I still really like to be in control of a lot of aspects of my life, which y'all have most likely seen. But as humans, I think it's safe to say that we're always going to fall short of the glory of God. We're not ever going to be able to have everything figured out. Everything's going to be white picket fences and beautiful houses for the rest of our lives. We have to rely on God in every aspect of our life because we don't have it figured out. And as leaders, if we're not relying on God for our strength and we're relying on our own abilities, we can only go so far. I can only play so many sports and reach so many kids on my own. But once God comes into that equation, it's multiplied exponentially. Um, so, uh, So number one was being held to a higher standard. Number two, relying on God. Number three, I really found that we have to love failure. As leaders, failing is something that a lot of us are really afraid of. I know personally, just because of that control aspect of my life, failing and taking risks is something I don't like to do. Just because it's vulnerable. It's scary to take risks, but we have to switch our mindset to realize that failing is actually an opportunity. One, for us to learn, but two, for us to carry out God's will. Because if we don't take that risk that God's asking us to do, what are the chances that what he's asking us might never get done? And maybe that person that you're supposed to pray for might never get healed or might never meet Jesus. And that's really a scary thought, but it's very real. I think as leaders, relying fully on God, completely just lost my spot. But learning to love failure and taking risks, it gets really shaky. Because when you actually have to reach out to people and that fear of the unknown is so real, I think it's something that cripples a lot of Christians because we're not able to walk out God's will in a lot of areas of our life. But on page 88, Bill says, "We prayed for people and saw miracles. It was glorious, but it didn't take long to discover that there were also many that weren't healed." And that last part I really want to focus on because he says there were also many that weren't healed. There have probably been many times in each of our lives that we've prayed for people that haven't been healed. But just imagine for a moment that Bill got discouraged from seeing people not healed, and he decided that he was never going to pray for someone again. And when we have a fear of failure, that's basically what we're doing. It's saying that we don't want to take the risk to see the possibility of allowing God to come and do his will. And it'll cripple what God wants to do. It'll cripple our thought life. It'll cripple who we are in God. And all that to say that we could hinder someone from meeting God or reaching that healing that they need. And that's really scary. So fourthly, I want to talk about bringing big expectation in everything that we do. And this is something I really love about our church because we preach expectation like crazy. And it's something that I'm really learning because as a leader, as someone going to church, you can sense the difference in the atmosphere when there's no expectancy and when there's no faith. Because it's as if we're just kind of going through the motions. We just want to check off the box and be done with the night. But where there's expectation, there's hunger. And when you allow that expectation to fill the room, when you put an expectation on the presence of God to show up, you begin to see signs and miracles and things that you would never see otherwise. And I think just as leaders, bringing that expectation, the big expectation, and I know a lot of people that we lead, they don't have that same expectation for themselves. So as leaders, we have to bring that for them, and that can oftentimes be really hard on us. But I think that's something so important, and that I'm learning is to never walk into a situation without expecting big things to happen. And finally, number 5, speaking for myself and also to y'all, we have to kick pride to the curb. Pride is something that will completely rock your world. It's something that will hinder you from doing anything that God wants you to do. Because as leaders, if we allow pride to rest in our hearts, we'll be so blinded by our own accomplishments that we forget who accomplished it for us. And by definition, pride is the satisfaction of one's own achievements. And in reality, it's like it takes your focus from God and puts it on yourself. And that's just something so scary because once that happens, you lose touch with who it is that gives you the strength to do everything that you're doing. And it kind of goes back to relying on God because that 100% for God is now turned into relying on yourself. And I know personally, I grew up really prideful and hard-headed. I love to think that I had every answer. I love to think that I had it all figured out. Um, but really, I couldn't see what God was trying to teach me, and I didn't allow God to teach me anything because I was so prideful in what I knew and in myself and how I carried myself. But um, pride will kill God's will if you allow it to. Proverbs 11:2 says, "When pride comes, then comes disgrace, but with humility comes wisdom." And I really just want to be known as a man of wisdom. I don't want to hinder God's will for my life. But just wrapping up, I'm out of time. But I hope this helps y'all. I hope it encourages y'all. But one, learn how to hold yourself to a higher standard. Learn how to rely on God. Switch your mindset to see failure as a positive and as an opportunity. Always expect big things in everything that we do, and kick pride to the curb. Love y'all.